Welcome back, everybody. You're here on the night shift with Brian Blackwell. Get warm and cozy because we're about to go under the covers with board game design. Come on, you didn't see that coming. That's ridiculous to start a video like that. Anyway, if you were following along with the last two videos, you know that today we're up to card allotment. And this is a part that I'm really excited about because this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, where the game actually gets created because, of course, the rules are fundamental, but this is the content. This is where we answer those questions like, how do you come up with a name? How do you come up with a value? What kind of values are necessary for the game that you're making? And so we've been using Recitals of Redimere, the Orctide, which is a game that I'm working on recently, and it's really in its infancy. So it allows us to kind of look at some things from a fresh perspective. This thing hasn't really been worked through a lot. Now, you know that fundamental to game design is playtesting and trying to get your game to the table as soon as possible. And that's definitely advice that you don't want to ignore, because you don't want to put in a lot of time and effort on design and then you get it to the table and man, you'd be surprised at how how different things can seem in your mind relative to how they are when you actually try and play them. I mean, what makes perfect sense to you when you're thinking about it, I mean, and this could be over the course of weeks and even months, if you make the mistake of not playing it for that amount of time, what makes sense for that period of time could just in an instant be blown out of the water. It's crazy. So definitely get your game to the table as soon as possible. Now, in this case, this is a deck building game. As I mentioned, it's based on a variant rule set that I made for the DC deck building game. I pretty much know how this thing is going to play out. What I don't know is how the values are going to play out, how the various effects and abilities are going to interact with each other. Those things are going to have to be play tested. But when you're playtesting on that level, you need to have a full game pretty much to play. I mean, not a full game. I don't have to make every single card, but I need to make enough cards to, you know, get through some turns and have some randomness occur in those cards and things just to see what's happening. You know, I've been doing this maybe for about 2 years, but like I've said, pretty much in a vacuum. I don't know anybody else in my life who designs board games. I don't even know anyone who would know what the board games on my shelf are. Okay, so I mean, I have a friend who I do play board games with, and he's, you know, into it and stuff like that, but he's not part of the hobby. He doesn't know all of these games and you know, these household names like Arkham Horror or Descent, or, you know. So I mean, this is really something that I'm not talking to anybody about in my daily life. But I have been doing it for a while, and I can kind of tell just as I'm working within these files, you know, what's going to cause problems, what's going to, you know, flow pretty neatly. But in order to get it to the table, I have to have a good amount of cards to play. At least, you know, maybe half of a faction group, you know, for each faction. And if you watch the other videos, you know what I'm talking about. If you didn't watch the other videos, I suggest you do, just because you wanted the context to really understand the examples. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because it's not really about this game. And I think it would still be of value to kind of just explore what we're talking about if you're starting with this one. Okay, so here's my templates. And when I need to make a unit, I just grab all of this, I bring it down, and I fill it in. So let's take a look at, we saw the starter cards last time. +1 combat, +1 cunning. Cunning is basically a recruit value for buying your own cards. Combat is going to come into play when you're purchasing the opponent's cards, because obviously you recruit your own units, but you try to capture the opponent's units. In addition to that, you acquire your own equipment, but you try to destroy the opponent's equipment. So these are the two resources in the game. Attrition, it acts like, you know, like a wound card in something like Mage Knight, or you know, a weakness card in the DC deck builder, or what was it, Corruption in the Lord of the Rings deck builder. But what I decided to do here, instead of making it reduce your victory points by the end of the game, or just being a dead card in your hand, it is a dead card in your hand. But in addition, you must play them before any other cards in your hand, and they make you discard a card with a cost of 1 or more, which means it's not going to make you discard the card you want to discard, because these have a cost of 0, the starter cards. It's going to make you discard the cards that you've purchased. Okay, so these could be very dangerous. You get a couple of these in your hand, they have a doubled effect because they're a dead card in your hand, and in addition they make you discard another card. So these aren't going to be maybe quite as prolific as in other games, and you'll see how that plays out as we go along, because it would be devastating. But when they do come into your hand, you're basically going to lose 2 cards. This card's a dead card, and then it's going to make you discard 1 more. Okay, so then you see now my flavor text. I always try and wrap it back into the system. You know, I remember a lot of times when I was playing Magic, I wasn't familiar with the lore. I wasn't reading the novels and this and that. And, you know, I played it back in the mid-90s, I guess it was, mid to late 90s. And then I hadn't played it for a number of years, and I started playing it again in like 2007. I wasn't familiar with a lot of the lore that had happened in that time and stuff like that. And, you know, I'd read some of this flavor text, it just wouldn't make any sense to me. So I always try and wrap it back into this game. You know, so here we have Dignitary Pax. And you're going to see that Pax is one of the units in the game. Okay, and then his flavor text will go a little bit further in terms of describing who he is. And so his ability, as well as his flavor text, will lend thematic context to him. And then when you read his quote on another card, it'll kind of make sense, and it'll draw out more of the theme. Because, you know, in this kind of game, in a deck building game, theme can be a challenge. You know, I don't know if you saw my video comparing A Touch of Evil with Dark Gothic. I got into this a little bit in terms of the limitations of this style of game in eliciting a theme. So I try to use everything I can to bring it together and keep it within the confines of this game. So letting you see the world, but pretty much only what the focus is here. Not the whole world outside, but the world as it's you know, being revealed in this game. So the attrition cards are not going to start in your hand. They're going to be added via you know, negative effects from your opponent, basically. The neutral cards, these are cards that are going to be randomized and split between the 2 factions. So these neutral cards can show up in either faction's deck, and every time you play the game it'll be different. And they're things that are, you know, maybe part of the world, but not specific to any faction. So here you have a Raging Gorgolith. Now, a Gorgolith is a monster that I use in one of my other Redimere games. And he basically devours, you know, the units that attack him. So I decided that this Gorgolith is from Hillspot, which is a location on the map. And I have a map, so I'll show it to you here. You know, now this map, I mean, I drew up in 2 seconds as I tried to figure out, you know, what this particular area looks like. This war takes place in the land of Redimere, but within the region of Canton Fields. This is a region that I hadn't explored in my previous games, so I didn't have a map, I didn't have a layout, I had a very nebulous concept of what was even there. So I just kind of, as I was pondering this, drew up this map, and it's not complete. It's the first, you know, the first little map that I drew of it, but it's kind of starting to flesh out as I make the cards, because I get ideas, and then I bring those locations, you know, into this map, and little by little we'll flesh out the world. So you'll see, if Hillspot is controlled, the controlling faction destroys the top 2 cards of their basic units pile. So in other words, if you went to Hillspot and captured that location, you encounter this Gorgolith, and he eats 2 of your basic units. That's what he does as soon as this card is revealed from the deck. Regardless of which faction has this card in their deck, it's going to be the controller of this location that's going to have this negative effect happen to them. Now, if Hillspot is controlled, Hillspot may not even be in the game because locations are randomized as well. So it also does some other things. It cannot be destroyed. So even though it's appearing in the opposing faction's row, when you attack it, it's not going to be destroyed. It's going to be captured. Well, actually, all units in the opposing faction's row would be captured, not destroyed. But you might have cards that allow you to destroy the opposing faction's units. This would not apply to the Gorgolith. The player who purchases this card destroys 2 units from their hand or play area, then places their card in their captured pile. Which means that even if this unit appears in your row, you're not going to get to recruit it. Okay? So you are going to be able to pay cost as opposed to defense, because cost is paid by the faction who has this card in their deck. Defense is paid by the faction that the opposing faction. So here we have to decide whether this is going to be cunning or combat. Can you use cunning to overcome the Gorgolith in any case? I don't know. Probably not. I mean, he's a wild beast. Cunning would come into play, maybe. And maybe just mechanically, we might want to allow the faction that has it in their deck to use cunning, and the opposing faction has to use combat. I've done this with other cards just to kind of give an advantage to the side that has it in their deck. I'm not sure about in this case, though. I don't think it really makes thematic sense. Now, this is a question that has to be answered. Are we going to use theme to make these decisions, or are we going to use mechanics to make these decisions? For myself, I always go theme first. The mechanics are there to serve the theme. So I want everything I do to reflect the theme primarily, and the mechanics are a secondary, though extremely important factor. So I think in this case, you can't really use cunning to defeat the Gorgolith. In which case, this becomes less important, although if you do have cards that destroy units, we don't want you to be able to just destroy the Gorgolith outright. He's too strong. So we're going to leave this in. That means his cost and defense are the same, which, is fine, because you still want the cards to have a cost value and have a defense value, because that's standard for units in the game, and also there might be other things that refer to those values. So if something says if you have a unit with cost X, it does this and that. So we want to make sure that those 2 values are still there, even though they're redundant. Okay, and then we have some flavor text that reflects the nature of the beast, and then we have 3 VPs. Okay, so that's a high victory point value for cards in this game. Most cards, unit cards especially, would have 1, maybe 2, if they're important characters. The big victory point cards are the locations, and then secondarily the captains. So for a regular unit coming out, this is a very big victory point value. So basically, when this thing comes out, it's going to be a target for sure, but it's requiring an amount of resources that's comparable to the captains. So it's going to be a tough kill, and by choosing to kill this, you're going to be forsaking attacking a captain. Now, the consideration here is that the opponent's captains are available for you to defeat at any time. They're not going to be able to be captured by their own faction. So you're not kind of racing to see who gets those captains. So you might decide, all right, I'm going to leave the captain there. I'll get him another time because he'll be there for me. But the Gorgolith, I don't want my opponent to get him. So I'm going to spend my resources on the Gorgolith now, and then we'll get the captain later. Of course, by doing that, you're leaving the captain on the field, and the captain has negative effects for your faction. So, there's some considerations there. Okay, but that's an interesting card to come out of the deck. That is the only neutral event card, and events can be anything. They can be, things that happen in the world. This is a unit, but it's also an event. It's the event of the Raging Gorgolith appearing on the battlefield and wreaking havoc. But yeah, so we only have 1 of these so far. But we do have locations, and you can see here I keep a little running total. I want there to be 10 locations in total. Right now we have 7. And I want there to be 40 neutral cards in total, and right now there's 8, so there's 1 event and 7 locations, I guess. These totals are not 100% up to date. I tend to update them when I need that information for something. So if I want to say, oh, how many locations do I have? You know, then I'll go in, I'll count them, I'll make sure it's right, and then I'll update it. So this is just in process, kind of. These numbers aren't 100% accurate, probably. Okay, Bankston represents the main city of this area. So it's worth 7 VP. So you see how much higher the location values are. I said 3 was a lot for a unit, and here we have 7. Now you'll notice that the cost and the defense is different. I wrote it in the rules. Let's see here. We go to locations. Okay. If it is in the opponent's row, the location, you must pay the defense, as usual for cards in the opponent's row. The defense value on locations is higher than their cost. Taking control of a location surrounded by the enemy is no easy task. Locations are worth VP at the end of the game and have the highest VP values of all card types. So this is the thematic idea behind these values, is that if this location is coming out in the opponent's row, because again, if you haven't been following, there's 2 decks, 1 for each faction, and they're going to create their own row of cards that can be purchased. So if this is coming out of the opponent's deck, then that means it's kind of, you know, surrounded by the opponent's units. It's going to be out in the active field, in the lineup, surrounded by their units, their equipment cards, the other things having to do with their faction. So we're going to say that their armies are like near this location. Maybe they're moving in to take this location, because indeed either faction can purchase the location from the active field. And we're going to say that they're closer. They're in that area. So that's why the defense value is going to be higher than the cost. If this comes out of your deck, you're going to be able to get it for 7 cunning, which means you just have to kind of like, you know, figure out how to get in there and figure out how to man this location and take it under your control. There's nothing to fight in order to get it, but you're going to have to use combat and a higher value in order to take it, because it's in the opponent's area. They're already there, they're already surrounding it. You're going to have to fight to get this location. Now, of course, each faction has an equal number of locations, so it's fair in that regard. Okay, and now each location is going to give you an ability that you can use, and it's a standing ability. In other words, it can be used at any time on your turn if your faction controls this location. So draw 2 cards, place 1 in your hand, then discard or destroy the other. So it's letting you draw, and it's also letting you potentially destroy unwanted cards, which, as you know, is an important part of a deck building game. Okay, so this is Bankston. It's a town. We're going to say you draw cards because, you know, you find things in a town. You might find units to recruit. You might find equipment or other things. So that's where the drawing cards comes into play. And then it's giving you some choice as to what you want to do with it. You have, you know, options in the town. So that's kind of the idea behind Bankston. Dawn's Crest. Dawn's Crest is the mountain home of the Starborn Elves, which are like the high elves of the world. They kind of remove themselves from the central areas of Canton Fields, just kind of finding life amongst the men and dwarves who've come from foreign lands. A little bit distasteful, kind of getting in the way of their own cultural practice and stuff like that. So they actually moved on and went to Dawn's Crest, which I'll bring up the map here so you could take a look and see what that looks like. One moment. Okay, so let's take a look at Dawn's Crest. You can see it here in the east, in the mountains. This is a location that is going to be difficult to take. Not only is it well guarded, but it's hard to get into, easily defensible. So you see the very high defense value here, 12 combat, 10 cunning. I mean, it's a vast, you know, array of tunnels and halls and things like that. This is a high cost location, but look at the VPs, 10. Okay, so that's huge. I believe it's actually the most out of all the ones that I have so far, and it'll probably remain that way. You may search your deck for 1 tactics card and place it into your hand, then reshuffle your deck. So you actually get to search your deck for a tactics card. Tactics cards are basically just, what they sound like, abilities that are not associated with a unit or a piece of equipment or anything like that. You just play them, they happen, that's it. And so this allows you to search your deck, which is a very rare ability in the game. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the fortification value. When you control a location, you can fortify that location with units from your hand. So you take control of a location, you put it out, and then on each of your turns, you can take units from your hand and put them at that location. When you do that, they remain at that location face down, and you'll only be able to use them if that location comes under assault. If you remember from the last video, when a location comes under assault, cards from your reserves come into your hand, and now you're also going to have these units that are fortifying the location coming into your hand, which is a huge advantage for the defender because the attacker doesn't have that. So not only do you have your hand of 5 cards, you have your reserves, which is 3 cards maximum, and now you have the fortified units. So the fortifying units, which in this case is 5, which is huge. You got 5 extra cards. So that's going to make it very, very difficult for the attacker to take this location. So you're going to want to try and get it when it's out on the active field, not try and take it over later. Or perhaps, if you do miss it the first time around, to launch your assault quickly before they have a chance to fortify. Yeah, so, there are abilities in the game that will let you maybe, reduce the number of the opponent's units during assaults and things like that, but you're going to have to pretty much pull out all the stops to grab this one, and, it could be a game changer at the end of a close game. Now, in terms of getting this to be a close game, because I don't know about you, but, well, in the DC deck building game, I find that it's very swingy. And that, you could have blowouts as well, like, 30 VPs, difference between, the front runner and the next player. And that's how it was in my variant as well. So I'd like to get this a little bit tighter, but I don't know how easy that's going to be. I'd imagine if it was easy, everybody would do it. So I'm going to have to see when I play this game and kind of refine it and try and get this, a little bit tighter where something like 10 VPs would be, a huge difference. But yeah, this is probably the premier location in the game. Now, Dunes Borough is kind of a less important location. See, the VP's 4. The cost to grab it is about the same as a normal card. Its ability, you may place a card from your discard pile on top of your deck. You don't even get to put the card in your hand. Dunes Borough is kind of a place for outcasts and scoundrels and that sort of thing. There's a lot of scavenging people who, couldn't fit into society and things like that. So you may place a card from your discard pile. That kind of reflects the scavenging aspect. And then, you could put it on top of your deck. So you can't gain access to it immediately, but you'll have it for the next turn. Gaia Watch Keep. Okay, so let's just go to the map real quick again so you could see these locations as we go, in case you missed them the last time we were looking. So Dunes Borough up in the north, just to the west of Gully Cove, and then Gaia Watch Keep is centrally located, overlooking the farmlands and stands as like a defensive outpost right near the main city of Bankston. Okay, so it has very high defense value, 12 as compared to 8. Now typically you see 6 defense relative to 4, 12 defense relative to 10, 9 defense relative to 7, so a difference of 2. At Gaia Watch Keep there's a difference of 4, because this is a defensive outpost. Okay, so this is, particularly difficult to crack. You may fortify this location with 1 unit from your discard pile. Typically, you can only fortify with units from your hand, which means you got to get lucky enough to draw the units you want to fortify with. And that's not always just, hey, the best unit, because remember, when it goes to fortify, you don't have access to that card, unless that location comes under assault. So let's say you take your best card and you fortify Dunes Borough, the opponent may think, hey, I'm not even going for Dunes Borough, it's only worth 4, I'm not willing to, lose units or whatever trying to take it. So when you fortify, it's a big decision, and there may be certain units you want to do that with and certain units you don't. In addition, some units have assault abilities that only come into play during an assault. So those may be the ones you want to use to fortify, as opposed to units that are more valuable in the regular, turns of the game. So this allows you to choose a unit from your discard pile, which, as you know, in a deck building game could be your entire deck at times. So this lets you kind of pinpoint who you want to fortify Garwatch Keep. In addition, you may place one unit fortifying this location into your discard pile. So this allows you to switch out units. So you can move a unit into your discard pile, you can take a unit from your discard pile and put it here. So it's kind of like this defensive outpost where there's a changing of the guard. You can kind of think of it in that way. Okay, so VP 8. Big VP because it has a pretty significant cost and a very high defense. We want to compensate this very high defense with a high VP value. I mean, if this was 12 to try and take it, which is, as high as Dawn's Crest, but it was only worth 5 victory points, you might just be like, hey, it's not worth it. We want to make it worth it. We want to even make it where you're saying, man, this is a close game. This could be the game changer. I got to try and go for this thing. Okay, and now here's Hillspot that we were talking about before with the Gorgolith. Okay, Hillspot is just this small little mountain range kind of sticking up out of nowhere. It's not surrounded by other mountains. It's just kind of these tall hills and tall mountain peaks right in the middle of nowhere. So you may look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's faction deck, then place them at the top or bottom of the deck. And this is meant to kind of indicate Hillspot as a lookout point. It's very, very high. It's fairly remote, all the way to the west, kind of out of the way of most of the main fray, which would be centered probably around Bankston and Garwatch Keep. And so from here you can kind of look out. It's also on the border of the Orc lands and Canton Fields. Okay, so the Orcs came from the west into Canton Fields from the north and south of Hillspot. So from this location you'd be able to see what the Orc movement on the one side, you'd be able to see the champions movements on the other side. So it's a good lookout spot. So you can look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's faction deck, and then you can do something about it from there. Okay, and that has 5. Now this area here, this is the item description, if you didn't notice that before. I'm sorry, the image description. This is like what I want to remind myself about in terms of what the picture is going to look like on the card. Okay, so Garwatch Keep overlooking the Tarn with 5 figures scattered about the parapets, because this this has a 4. Oh, I changed it. I made Dawn's Crest more. This used to be 5. So the fortification is 5 on that one and 4 on this one, so I want this to be 4 figures to kind of indicate, the units that would be fortifying it. I guess I just wanted Dawn's Crest to be the most highly fortified because it's worth the most VP. And although this is a defensive outpost, it's a relatively small one, so this is okay. Okay, so thinking about what the cards are going to look like when the time comes, because sometimes you get that image in your mind and you don't want to forget it, and sometimes you have something like this, a Skitter Skim. Well, what's that? I mean, it's just a beast that I made up. So in the moment, I was inspired to an idea, something came into my mind. Later on, this is not a very descriptive kind of thing in terms of its physical appearance, so I wrote this description, which you can see is written for me. I mean, it's just, long, low, shaggy, matted, black insectoid cat / Chinese dragon with a low flat head and a wide mouth with bottom-feeding fish qualities. Long whiskerous protuberances from muzzle. So just throwing in all the adjectives and everything to just kind of wrap my head around what this thing is going to look like. When the time comes for art, we'll work it out in more detail at that point, but this gives me all the general information about it. Okay, so let's go back up. That was Hillspot. Powderwood. Powderwood is a place to the southeast, remote. It's a dense wood where like a shell kind of comes off the trees, and I guess like a pollenish kind of thing comes off the trees, and it's like you're like kind of like maybe ankle to knee deep in this powder, basically, like just a combination of little shards of bark and stuff coming off the trees, and this stuff is falling constantly, and it's just it's like an allergy nightmare. Okay, so that's the Powderwood, and there reside elves who did not make the transition into Dawn's Crest. So these are elves who find life amongst men and dwarves more agreeable, and in that way they're more like them. They have more dealings with them. They kind of resisted the move to Dawn's Crest, which is kind of like, I guess if you want to think of it in the classic elf way of like being a little uppity or something like that. These are the more down and dirty kind of blue-collar elves. Not exactly like a wood elf. More like men. And they're renowned blacksmiths. The blacksmiths of Powderwood are skilled and resourceful. Their repairs can equip an army from a heap of scrap. So their ability, you may place one equipment card from your discard pile into your hand. Okay? Maybe I should make this the destroyed pile. That would probably make more sense. This is fine in terms of a deck building game, the context of something that's discarded, maybe being a broken piece of equipment or a used piece of equipment. The destroyed pile, it's not as likely that there's going to be equipment cards there. The enemy at any point could choose to destroy your equipment from the active field. In some cases, if you were called upon to destroy a card, you may choose an equipment, but it's feasible that you could go a whole game without an equipment in the destroyed pile. So as much as that would be more thematic, it would render this ability, useless much of the time, or at least unlikely to be useful. So I think probably discard pile is best here for this. And so VP6 on this one has a pretty significant defense. It's defensible because obviously the elves who reside there know the terrain, and visibility is very, very poor. So you see the spread here is 3 as opposed to the usual 2, and that kind of indicates that. And then lastly, for right now, we have the Shore Road, which is the main road of travel in and out of this region. Draw a card from your faction deck. If it's a unit, place it in your hand. Otherwise, place it in the active field. So here we're trying to kind of bring about the idea of things arriving via this road. This road goes west and east, leaving the region. And so units coming in, goods coming in would come via the Shore Road. So you flip the top card of your deck. If it's a unit, you get to recruit it immediately. Otherwise, you put it in the active field. It becomes an available, piece of equipment or whatever it is. Okay, so, and here we have an even cost and defense because it's an open road. There's no advantage either way. It's just basically an open battlefield, and the VP of 5 to kind of match that. Okay, so those are all the equipment. All the locations. And we are at 30 minutes, so you know what? I don't think we're going to do all of the card allotment in this video. Let's leave it at the locations. We've talked a lot, and it puts us in a great spot to start next time because we're done with the neutral cards. We get to go to the Champions of Redimere and see what the men, elves, and dwarves are going to have in store. So, again, thanks for checking in. I hope that this is of use to you. I'm enjoying sharing this with you and kind of spending time, thinking about these things, reviewing these things, kind of, checking in on my thought process about how to make these decisions. And I hope to hear from you in terms of whether you think, I'm missing something, or I could be going about it in maybe a different way, or just, it all comes down to point of view, doesn't it? So my point of view is only one, and, it would be nice to hear others. So I'll see you next time for the Champions of Redimere.